During this talk, it's a pretty light, breezy talk, so if you have any questions, you can just go ahead and try to interrupt me and ask me, rather than wait until the end. This is about playing with music with Perl. It's, just goofing on music, goofing on Elvis, as Michael Stipe would say. Though it is possible to create audio directly with Perl, we're not going to focus on that because it's not really Perl's strong suit, I guess. And also it just gets into much more complicated math much more quickly. So the key thing we'll be working with is MIDI, and the Perl MIDI distribution is a key module for this. Basically, Perl will create MIDI files, and then we'll worry about somebody else actually rendering it or auditioning it. I'll be using Fluid Synth, which uses sounds fonts, which are technology from the 90s. But you can also use Timidity or Wild MIDI, or if you're fancy, C-Sound or Chuck or Pure Data, or some sort of commercial program to import the MIDI into, and then actually render it. But here's a simple example, pretty much from the CPAN documentation, or the module documentation from CPAN. The key object that the MIDI package uses is an opus, and in opuses you have tracks, and then in tracks you have events. So you can see here there's a text event that's not very important, then there's a set tempo event, and you specify the time between beats in microseconds, so I'm not actually sure what beats per minute that is. And then what this example does is it puts in notes of increasingly smaller duration. And one thing to notice here is that there are separate note on and note off events. So there's not really a concept of duration of a note by itself. It's merely the time between the note on and note off events happened. And it's possible to never have a note off event. That's not good, but it can happen. And the way the parameters are ordered is you have the note, like event type, note on or note off, then the time, which is a delta time from the last event, not an absolute time. And then you have the channel, which here is 9 because that's for percussion. And then you have the pitch, which is the cowbell at 56, and then the velocity, which is the full velocity. It goes from 0 to 127. And then yes.
So is the channel 0-based then?
Yes.
Okay.
But in all the MIDI documentation, it's all 1-based. So everything says channel 10s for percussion. Right, so it's... And then also the MIDI patches of the instrument names, those are all 1-based in documentation, but 0-based here. Don't think so. Unfortunately, I don't think so. Well, yeah, a little. I'm not sure what that's getting weird. Anywho here, we'll try to put an example. Oh, golly. Actually, we'll change the plans. You won't see what I'll type. I'll just tell you what I'm typing because it's not that important. It's called cowbell.midi. You can hear it getting faster and faster. Pretty much the demo for that. There we go. But the problem with this is people don't think about things in terms of offsets from the last event. You normally think of them in terms of from the beginning of the song or the beginning of the measure or the beginning of a section. And so there's a very helpful module, MIDI Score, which does just that. So the events are still it's just still a list of lists. But instead of delta time, you just have an absolute time, and then you also specify the duration as well. And so one thing about this, it makes it much easier to shift things around in time. So if you have a whole section of events, you can just move it forward and repeat it, rather than having to calculate all the delta times again. And we'll just play what this is. This is also basically just an example directly from documentation. A familiar melody. And you'll notice at the set tempo, I used a BPM to milliseconds, but still have to multiply by 1,000 because it's the MIDI actually wants it in microseconds. There's a module music tempo, which I believe it just exports these 4 functions: BPM to milliseconds, milliseconds to BPM, or BPM to Italian, like Andante or Allegro, Pesamisso, maybe, I don't know, Italian or music well. And you can also specify for some of these a second optional beat argument. So instead of using a quarter note for how many milliseconds you want, you can say 8th note or 16th note. Now here's a more interesting module, music chord note. Basically, you give it a chord or chord type, and it'll give you back either the notes or the semitone offsets for the root of all the notes. So this is just from the documentation, but if you give it the C7 minor 7th, you can get the actual note names. So you just give it a major 7th without an actual note or pitch associated with it. It'll just give you the semitone offsets. And so then what you can do is, what I did here is just go through a bunch of different chords and then see what they sound like. And with music chord note, bass is just a major triad. I'm not sure why there's not a better name for it. And so this demo just goes through all these chords, kind of jazzy chords that I don't really understand. I have been listening to a lot of Steely Dan recently, but music note. Fun. Yeah, there's 65, I think, chords types that music chord note knows about, and I'm not sure how often I'd use most of them. But there's also a inverse module, music chord namer, where if you give it a bunch of notes, it will give you back the chord the best it can. However, it doesn't work with semitone offsets. You have to give it the actual note names. One could fix that to do offsets, but that seems like work. I don't really want to volunteer that. In addition to chords, you have scales. And similarly to music chord note, you can get either the tone names, pitch names themselves, or the semitone offsets. There's all the scales that it currently knows about. A bunch of them. And I made a demo that basically goes through the first 7 modes, major and minor, and all the other fun modes in there. Phrygian, Mixolydian, and then plays them in order. And let's try that. Just going through various modes. That's a chromatic scale. And then it does, I think, whole tone, and then some other scales that are not. Basically, when the scale stops being 7 notes in length, it gets less musical and weird. You don't have the rhythm nature to it. There's another chord module, music chord positions, which basically, what I'm going to demonstrate here is creating inversions, which if you have a chord like this, which is C, E, G, then the first inversion, you take the C and move it an octave up, and you have E, G, C, and then you do it again, you have G, C, E. And what this demo does is takes a 13 chord, which has a whole bunch of notes in it, and then, so tiny. And the chord inversion routine returns all the inversions, and this goes through them one by one and plays each of them. Is this loud enough? Okay. So you can hear it. It gets higher and higher pitch as all the notes are basically transposed up an octave. And now I'm going to show. These are 2 interesting modules that are very complicated, and I don't understand them. Actually, from the documentation it says the Plomp-Lavelle consonance curve calculations based on work by William Setheriz and others. And then it says, none of this will make sense without some grounding in music theory and the reference papers. And I haven't read the reference papers, and my music theory grounding is kind of spotty. But, and the Cope one is by a guy named David Cope. But what I'm using here is, basically the two modules tell you how much tension there is in a set of notes, which is basically the dissonance, how unpleasant it sounds, roughly. And this goes through those 6 or 7 chords I played earlier, and it outputs all the two various tension measures. And as the documentation says, there's no, like the two measures aren't comparable to themselves or really anything else. I mean, to each other. They're comparable to themselves. Let me drag this over for y'all. And they're the tension values of the chords. I'll play them again. Or maybe not. A Perl file is not a MIDI file. But you see as they go on, they seem to get more and more dissonant. I don't think. But you can see both measures roughly increase as you go along, but they're very different scales, and I don't. But it is interesting. It does correspond with like how you normally think of things. Ooh. And okay. And here's something that's not on CPAN, but I'm thinking perhaps I should put it. I don't think of music normally in terms of like events, and I think of things in pattern, and when I use commercial programs, I normally use the piano roll and look at things visually. And so what I've defined here is a drum pattern on the bottom that had used the hi-hat and snare, and the top section is just an instrument playing a major triad up and down. And basically, this just goes through all the MIDI instruments, playing all the sounds, with a drum beat underneath. Anybody see my mouse? There we go. Oh. That's a drum pattern along with that melody pattern, and the instrument just changes every cycle through. And I've listened to this more than once, just listening to the various sounds that the sound font I'm currently using has. That's the gist of that. And there are a whole bunch of other modules, like MIDI pitch. It provides routines for converting from a MIDI number, which is 1 to 127, with 60 being middle C, to either pitch name or frequency. There's music atone util, which has tons of utilities for all sorts of composition analysis for atonal music. There's music canon, which lets you create canons, which are like rounds, like row, row, row your boat, where you start again halfway through. Then there's music harmonics, which you can calculate harmonics of a string in stringed instruments. And Lilypon util lets you simply have a set of notes and then create, for me at least, create an image of a staff with the notes rendered there. And then there's notes modules. But that's the gist of my talk. Are there any questions or comments? Yes? I'm using Fluid Synth, which is available on Mac under Brew and on Linux. And it lets you specify any sort of sound font you want, which I was able to find a sound font that has all the general MIDI stuff in it. But I was using Wild MIDI under Linux before I started using my wife's laptop for this. Any other questions? Yes?
Are sound fonts something proprietary that you have to pay for and buy, or can you find one?
there's tons of free ones out there. The licenses may be kind of vague and not super perfect. There's I think it's FreePats. They're trying to create a completely, well, I guess not a sound font, it's a Gus patch for graphics ultrasound, but it's very similar sort of idea. They're trying to make a completely free and properly licensed general MIDI package, but there's lots of holes in it.
There is a sound font that's distributed with the Debian. When you install FluidSynth on the it will, one of the dependencies is a sound font.
Right.
And those guys, I haven't checked the license myself, but if it's on Debian, it's in the official Debian repository.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
It's got to be, or either it's like one example of them not doing due diligence on the licensing. Any other questions? Yes. There's a module called, might be Music Noise Gen, but it's called Noise Gen, I think. And it allows you to create like sine wave oscillators or other sort of oscillators and then pass them into filters and gain units and all that sort of stuff. And so you could do it that way. Otherwise, no, not really. I was trying things out. Let's see if this works. HDMI. I created a little program that basically type on the keyboard and makes noise. Ooh. And that sort of works for like percussion or other instruments that don't have a duration. But because I'm using curses, that you can only get the key down event, not the key up event. So it doesn't yeah. I'd have to use a better library like actual like GTK or TK would probably work. But yeah. I don't have any really good recommendations for stuff. I'd probably abandon that route and go through C Sound or Chuck or some other specific music programming language. Pardon? Right. There's a sort of purity about building something up completely from scratch that I like, but that takes a lot of effort, and so I gave up. But it is still really fun for me to just plug an electric guitar and then just write the simplest little program just to do all sorts of different types of distortion, which is very simple and easy to do, but it's not very advanced. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there any way to take music notes and then generate the code for
I'm not sure I understand your question. You mean from a format other than MIDI? Like some,
in other words, you have sheet music.
right.
Reverse engineer, and then from that to this code,
I'm not. I mean, there are commercial programs where you can scan stuff in and get some sort of music like MIDI or out, but I'm unaware of anything Perl land or open source. Anything else? All right, well, thank you for your time.